morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio, 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank 1 minute at a time. I am your co-host, Hugh David.
And I'm your other co-host, Dev Sodiger. And on today's show, we're going to be looking at minute 68, where Martin continues to be interrogated by Debbie's dad, Mr. Newbury. I don't think we ever get a first name for him.
It is an interrogation, isn't it?
It is a bit.
I hadn't thought of that. It does feel like somebody with military experience, even though we don't know what he actually does for a living yet, other than we will discover later on that he's there for... that we will discover something about him, but that puts him more firmly in Martin's world. But for now, yes, maybe it's partly because it's the actor who we discussed last episode, very well known for playing these sorts of authority figures. But there's also a nice kind of mellowed. I've had a few, whiskey sours and I don't really care anymore mood to this conversation as well, that kind of tempers that interrogative element.
And there is a the dialogue here is really good, and unfortunately I kind of spoiled some of it yesterday's minute.
It's fine. It's fine.
I think this may be the only character that interacts with Martin that instantly legitimately believes Martin's job.
Yes.
When Martin says it.
Yes.
And he kind of plays it off very, very well. And the acting here is superb because Martin's like professional killer. Tells him that he's a professional killer. And his response is classic, right? Good for you. It's a growth industry.
Yes.
But then Martin leaves and Mr. Newbury just keeps drinking that whiskey, just necks an entire full glass of whiskey. And you can see it's like, it's just like, just trying to burn it out, I guess.
I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's just, you say he takes it in his stride. I'm not sure if he's got to a point in that conversation where he just doesn't care anymore about anything to do with Martin, because having established that he's lost a bet, which is the thing he looks most aggrieved about in the whole conversation.
I think that's a metaphorical bet. I don't think it's a literal bet.
Okay, fair enough. I think it might.
What he's saying is, I'm kind of disappointed that Martin's back.
I would
in my daughter's life.
Okay, fair enough. I think he might actually be a literal bet. I genuinely do, mostly because of the kind of people I know over the years who insist on taking bets. But but I take your point absolutely. He then follows it up with the essential: "Did I get you wrong?" in insulting him. And when he discovers he didn't get him wrong, he doesn't have anything to say.
Yeah.
He just doesn't care at that point. The fact that he starts quoting Shakespeare and then halfway through just goes, "Fuck it." Yeah. I love it. It's like, but you think, oh, we're going to get profound older man wisdom here. And then he's like, nah, can't be bothered. I'll go back to my book and my drink. What are you doing?
I mean, it's also that moment of realizing that, people that he thought of as little children are adults, and he has to interact with them as an adult, and that is
he doesn't want to, though, does he?
No, but it's I think that when he realizes that he is actually like in the working world, does a real job, isn't like he can't pin the other like belittling terms that he was hoping to on Martin's character.
Yes,
it's like. And now I need to kind of completely change how I interact with this person.
Yes, but I don't want to, so go away.
Yeah.
I think maybe I've seen this a lot more in recent years, partly because of my age and partly because I've been working in an institution where I'm working with people who are planning for retirement and then going into retirement, and I'm seeing it quite actively, and I'm seeing people really draw a line in the sand in their interactions with younger people. One teacher who retired last year literally said to me, "I don't care anymore about this particular year group. I am done with them. I just don't have the energy or the time to meet them partway, and I also don't understand why they are like they are." And I was like, "Fair enough, man. You're gone in a term and a half.
Yeah.
that you don't care at this point, and I'm not going to try and persuade you different. Like, I have to be here for longer. I will make the effort, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
And this guy reminds me absolutely of that.
Yeah.
And worse still, the thing that he doesn't want to deal with is right there in his home, in his lounge. It's not even like on the end of a phone or something. It's like
Yeah.
Debbie really has this is Martin's punishment for making her think he was going to stand her up again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go into
And
my dad.
we have a little teaser in here as to, potentially this the the reckoning that is coming, right? Because
Yes.
we've had a few hints here and there, right? Like they're selling their home despite no indication that there's any financial hardship.
Yep.
There's no indication that he needs to move to a smaller place.
Yep.
He's still, seemingly mobile and comfortable, and clearly, the house is they've been in for years. He's got it the way he likes it. So the move, that selling the house, seems a little surprising.
Hmm.
I suppose you could say from the sparsity of furniture that maybe there is some economic hardship and they're getting rid of stuff to
Hmm.
downsize. But I think it's what he's reading is kind of an interesting time. It's a little hard to see, and I'm speculating a bit here, but it looks like it is a fairly serious non-fiction tome
Yep.
on criminal procedure or something like that. Is
Hmm.
what I was reading when I was trying to still frame through it and capture what it is. And oh my god, I wish they would remaster this so that we get a clearer image. But
Yeah.
uh, so this is like he's looking into criminal procedure. And I think that is kind of a little bit of a nod to the fact that he is ultimately the target for Martin.
Yes.
That's the person he's meant to be targeting, and I think Grosse knows this, right? Grosse has he knows who the target is. I mean,
Oh yeah,
obviously
he's
this was
read it.
Grosse's job before it was
Yeah.
Martin's. Before Martin took it gratis to
Yeah.
make good on something else,
Yeah.
and so Grosse knows that he's been hanging out with Debbie, and it's Debbie's father that's the target,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's why it was the teasing about Grosse would be the one to do the job,
Yeah.
because Grosse was playing that as if Martin also knew, but
Yes.
Martin obviously still hasn't opened his package. He doesn't know
Yes.
who the target is at this point.
I do
Um,
wonder if I wonder if Grocer assumes that Martin is using Debbie to get to the hit.
I think that's quite likely true. Yeah,
You know.
I mean, I don't think Grosse can perceive of romantic interest in the way that Martin is expressing it, in the concept that you could be hung up about somebody for 10 years
Mm.
without having ever seen them is just completely alien to Grocer. I don't think he
Yeah.
can conceive of that.
Agreed. I think it's I
Um,
think the very notion is anathema to him that you'd waste that much time on someone, let alone a
yeah,
woman.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is I think that normally in this situation, Mr. Newbury would actually be reading the magazine on the coffee table,
Mm.
right? He has Golf World or Golf Mart or
Yeah.
Golf
Yeah.
World, I
That
think,
kind of thing.
magazine,
Yeah.
right? And that's normally what he'd be reading, but he can't at the moment because he's got to prepare for the evidence that he's going to give in
Yes.
this case, and he does it low key. This is not him sat at his desk, and I'm sure he's got a very nice office with a very nice desk
Yes.
somewhere in that house. He's not there right now because he's probably been there most of the day, and it's now 6-7 o'clock in the evening. I mean, they're running late, right? And it started at 7:25, so like
Yeah.
7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and he's still working, but he's just moved it to the easy chair.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think there's some I can't remember if you mentioned this. I think you might have mentioned this last episode, but I think there is something quite interesting going on here about redemption, because ultimately this is the thing that these two men have in common, but they have yet to realize they have this in common. Newbury is cynical in and offhand about whatever it is he's been doing professionally, right? I've been exploiting the oppressed masses. We don't get any sense of what that is. You said last episode that maybe he was in oil, or something like that. The fact is that, as in classic Grosse Pointe Blank fashion, we don't need any particular detail to know. Like, the range of possibilities presents itself very readily in 1997 as to,
Yeah.
he's either been in tobacco, or he's been in oil, or he's been in something that involves Latin America somehow, because of course
Tobacco is a great shout. I hadn't
you
thought
know
of that.
but also fruit companies,
Yeah,
because
Del Monte or something. Yeah.
they had horrible connections with the CIA in Latin America,
Yeah.
and all that sort of thing. So he doesn't need it, again, pared back dialogue. It doesn't need any more than what we have to
Yep.
illustrate the man he is. But the fact that we will later discover he's turning evidence, and that fundamentally, I think that's because of Debi.
Interesting. I was going to ask this because
Okay.
I suspect,
Okay.
because there are three options here, right?
Right.
There's the realization, the fundamental change of heart, kind of truly altruistic
Okay.
reason, which
Right.
I think is pretty hard to buy into.
Yeah.
Uh, there is Debi, right? He's doing
Hmm.
this for his daughter so that she's safe and has a future, and like he can take the heat for it, and
Hmm.
she'll be left out of it. Although I'm not sure you turn evidence to,
Yeah.
maybe.
Agreed. It does seem a bit odd, but yeah.
To me, it seems like he got collared. It's the typical plea bargain. He
Hmm.
has to make the plea deal
Hmm.
to get himself off the hook. That's what it feels like. Is he
That
was
sounds
caught
fair.
and he's passing it up the chain. He's going to squeal to get out of it.
Yep, I can go with that. That makes total sense to me. And in that sense, I think, but I think my feeling is because we're in an era of, so I think Michael Mann's The Insider is good. It's several years earlier, if memory serves well. Or I might be getting my timeline wrong, but we're in an era of whistleblowing being a big thing in the news at the scale it's at. Like you say, he's not doing this for altruistic reasons, but I would assume that there's a component in there, given the mother's no longer in the picture. I
Mm.
would assume there's a component in there of, well, if I'm going to go down for this, I'd rather go down for it in a way that leaves Debi with something, not nothing.
Mm. Yeah, I
Where
could see that.
possibly, I don't know. I'm not trying to ascribe too much to him. I am just intrigued at the idea that he's so the notion that he might be so absolutely callow and unpleasant that he would never even consider that. You know what I mean?
I
I
don't
think
think.
there's somewhere in between.
Yeah, I don't think it's callousness or anything like that. I think what it is he's just a very absent father.
Hmm. Okay.
He worked a lot, and work was his life, and he
Right.
was, especially if it was oil or potentially even tobacco, and probably if he was in that kind of industrial farming side,
Right.
like travel was heavy, and so he grew up with, or Debbie grew up without him being
Yes.
particularly present,
Which
which
which is
also
yeah.
speaks to her independence. It
Yes.
speaks to um, the fact that like Martin doesn't even think twice about like going to the side entrance and
Hmm.
doing the secret knock, because they clearly did that all the time when they were in high school, because there wasn't
Mm.
the adult supervision, because
Hmm.
he was frequently not home.
Hmm. That makes sense. That makes sense. And in that sense, it's also, see, this is the other part that's interesting, right? Because we're getting a this is building our sense of Debbie, as well as introducing us to her dad and the interaction between the dad and Martin. Yes, it's a generational thing between that guy and Martin. Um, yes, it's an interesting reflection, because this whole film we've been talking about this whole business of the '80s generation that Blank is
Yeah.
from versus the older generation. But I also think it's interesting that, as you've just pointed out, we are learning something about Debbie here, and it's that she's not in the room. Once again, and this is very much a thing that goes back historically in this kind of fictions, whether it's written or filmed. You know, we learn about the women through the men. You know,
Yeah.
even in '97, that is not necessarily common, but it's it's starting to go, right? It's starting to slowly vanish. I mean, one of the things I've mentioned this film so often whenever we in this podcast, but I think it's such an interesting point of comparison. Doug Liman's Go as a film, right, is, there's moments in that film where you are fully, the characterization. It's all about either Sarah Polly or, oh crikey, what was her name? Katie Holmes, and you are not learning about them through the guys. They have their scenes, and their characterization is
Yep.
theirs to get across with their
Yep.
interactions. I always think of the scene where Timothy Oliphant says to Katie Holmes, professional interest, what are you on right now? And she's like, oh, I'm on a bit of ginseng and a bit of this, but that, nothing, that whole conversation about doing drugs but not drugs, that's a
Yep.
characterization thing, and we don't learn about that because Oliphant's character wants us to know, or because we're looking at it through Oliphant's eyes. The characters are on there's an even, if anything, we're on her side because we've been following her through the film. And I just, again, I keep wondering what this film would look like, or what a sequel would look like with a more active element for Debbie. I keep wondering if I don't know, because for me, one of the joys of this film is the interaction between the two, right? And that's so classically film noir. There's a sense of, like, not even film noir, but even like screwball comedies, right? There's a sense of the fast paced dialogue, and it would
Yep.
be really interesting to see her tossing off one liners that illustrate her attitude towards her dad, leaving her to her own self. And I know we're now in the realm of complete conjecture. Like, this is not. This is fan fiction. This is me going, "Oh, I wish this film had this." The film
I
does
think
not have
we
this.
get a small amount of it.
We do.
Not as much as you'd like, but there is a small amount
Yes.
of it coming up later on.
Yes, agreed. And I just feel like this is an interesting scene because this scene is about Martin, but actually it tells us enough about Debbie that it could have been about Debbie too, and it would have been fascinating to see a kind of. I would have loved to have seen her walk in and go, "So how are my two least favorite men getting on?" or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Just a
Right.
little thing that kind
Yeah.
of makes it clear that she rigged this because she wants them both to squirm.
You're right. It would have been, and it would have possibly been a more satisfying ending to the scene as well.
Possibly, yeah, because it
Than
does end on a weird kind of. It's a weird ending, isn't it?
it is. It's a very real ending. I feel like there are definitely instances where two people have run out of things to say.
Yeah.
One person does their retreat into, like, using their phone, as it would be these days mostly,
Yep.
or turning back to the book, and the other person is just kind of like limbo a little
Yep.
bit.
Yep.
It's a
Yep.
very, like, it's an awkwardness that's all too believable.
Very,
Um,
very real.
yeah,
And I mean, I think my last thing for this minute is that about that awkwardness. There is something about the delivery of okay, good seeing you again. That because this is a late '90s film, I can't help but think of Friends. It's so Chandler. It's very Chandler-esque.
oh, interesting.
I don't think it's. I
Okay,
don't think that was intended. I don't think. I don't think there's that's. I'm not. I don't. I'm not reading something just so much as I'm feeling the what's in the air of the '90s. Right. That kind
yeah,
of preppy, wisecracking, self-deprecating. Yeah, the kind of guy that John Cusack played in the '80s.
yeah. I mean, yeah,
You know.
it is, and it's, it's just, it's almost at the point of breaking the fourth wall and
Yes.
being like a nod to the audience of, well, I guess he's checked out now, kind of
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Very much
yeah.
so. Very much so.
Yep.
Right, and that brings us to the end of that scene, pretty much. Although, the next scene's before this minute is up, we do move on to the next scene, but we can leave that for the next episode.
We get all of a second of it, so we'll come back to it tomorrow.
Okay, so
This was minute 68 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your host, co-writers, and co-producers, Dev Sodiger and Hugh David.
you can find us at all good podcast players. You can find us on YouTube, X, and Spotify as well. In all sites, we are at Debi Radio. Our website is also debiradio.com. In all of those cases, it is spelt DEBI Radio.
That's right, and you can talk with us on our Facebook listeners group, Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. Again, DEBI for Debbie.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling of movement.